Welcome to Curmudgeon in the Cellar. I'm Tim Kask, but you knew that already because you came to my page. Superfluous, I didn't need to say that. Tonight I'm shilling for TotalCon, the best war game convention on the East Coast. And if you'd like to dispute that, well, send me tickets and give me a room and I'll be a guest at your con and we'll see. In any event, now for that. Several things to talk on tonight. First off, oddly enough, I've been asked, there's been several comments about my accent. Well, of course, nobody believes that they have an accent. I don't have an accent. Everybody else does. Actually, I was born in northwestern Illinois in an area called the Quad Cities. I lived there for 18 years, and I went in the Navy for 4 years, and intermixed and intermingled with people from all over the country, all sorts of accents. And I have an ear for accents that's kind of subconscious. I don't really set out to ape an accent, but if I spend an hour talking with a couple of people from, say, Georgia, I could very well sound like their cousin after an hour, and it would be totally subconscious that I was doing it. My mother had the same thing. She would come home from talking to Betty Gwaltney next door, who's from Paducah, Kentucky, and she'd sound just like Betty Gwaltney. Anyway, I was stationed out on the Pacific Northwest. I went to school in Southern Illinois, and it's very southern in Southern Illinois. It sounds more southern than it does. Sounds like more like a Confederate state than a Union state. We'll put it that way. So I don't know. My accent's a polyglot, I guess, of different dialects, and there's certain words and phrases I use that I simply like them. And if they have an origin in some part of the country or other, well, that's just incidental. So the best way to get me to talk about things is by putting stuff in the comments. And so that's what I've done tonight. I've gleaned a bunch of stuff out of the comments of the earlier episodes. So I found an interesting one. This person asked me, what do I have behind the screen? Yeah, behind the screen, that sacrosanct area where the DM presides over the game, and you got to keep your eyes away from, and you have to respect. Some DMs get really, really paranoid if they think you're looking over the edge. The only thing I ever try to keep secret behind the screen is the map, obviously. I've got the map, and they're trying to figure out where they're at, and that would be a bum idea if they got the map. Or if they saw the map. So, okay. But what's behind my screen? Some dice. The text for the episode. And by text, I mean the flavor text and or the monster descriptions and other stuff of that nature. If it's a pre-prepared one, well, then it's the thing you buy. If it's one I've made up, then it's all my notes along with the maps. And soft drink, and some sort of writing instrument. And that's about the most that I ever have back there. Now, there have been occasions when I have had nothing back there and run an adventure. I did that a few years ago at TotalCon, as a matter of fact. When I got caught short, and on Sunday, everybody that was signed up for my Sunday game had played in at least one of the other ones that I'd run that weekend. So I pulled out a map that I made years ago with a PC game mapping program, editing program, actually. And I ran a scenario off the top of my head where they were all paid to guard this seemingly impregnable warehouse, and of course it wasn't impregnable. I gotta find a better word for that. And the adventure took place as I went around the table going, and what are you doing? And what are you doing? And what are you doing? And they tell me where they were going, what they were looking for, the clues they were following up on. And by the time I got around to one end of the table, I went back over and started, okay, you found this, you didn't. So they were making it up, and I was playing by the seat of my pants. And when we got all done, 3.5, 4 hours later, because yes, this is one that they actually won and nobody died, I flipped over the screen and there was nothing behind it but the map. And they just kind of freaked out and says, where's the adventure? I said, well, you just created it. I said, we followed your directions and what you did. And I just gave you answers off the top of my head. And as in the old school, try this, try that, no problem. I had guards in this city and everything. And I couldn't get the city watch to take notice of these very strange, very out of place people running around with this giant silver barrel of the recovered loot. But in any event, that's what's behind my screen. Not very much. Soft drink, snack maybe. But I'm one that tends to take breaks every 90 minutes or so I don't need to have food back there. The liquids just to keep the throat lubricated. Let's see. Okay. How did I handle endurance? Or, excuse me, not endurance, encumbrance. Well, in the old school, we didn't pay a whole lot of attention to minute details of encumbrance any more than we paid attention to real carefully counting arrows or sling stones. That was minutia. That was bookkeeping. It was assumed that if they would recover their arrows if they weren't broken. I never got really into the minute parts of the bookkeeping back then. We really didn't. It was assumed that you had 30 or 40 arrows in a quiver, and I can't ever remember a game where they shot them all in one encounter or even would have used them all up, allowing for breakage and whatever. I used to make a lot of treasures with copper or ore, exceedingly rich ore. That was what they found, a whole cavern filled with ore. Well, then common sense came into play. Obviously, if you're going to fill all your backpacks and all your pockets with loot, whether it's gold coins, gold nuggets, or whatever, there had to be a common sense understanding amongst you and the players that no, you can't run real fast. No, you can't jump. If you're going to weigh yourself down like that, most of my guys back then would be sensible and like fill their pockets, but not every container that they had, because the thought was always that they could come back and get the rest of it later. So it is true that I devised an adventure a few years back in an abandoned long lost temple where all the gold and silver had been hauled out, but there was like 400,000 copper pieces, all collected from the offering plate, the offering box, and they hadn't had time to haul out the copper. So, yeah, that would be a problem. You can't possibly load enough copper, even if you filled up every pocket and every backpack. You couldn't possibly load up enough copper to make it worth your while to suffer the encumbrance ideas. I once wrote an adventure where the treasure was these rare honeys produced by these enchanted bees, and these honeys had medicinal and spell purposes and such that made them exceedingly much more valuable than their weight in gold. But in the adventure, well, nobody took buckets, and there weren't any watertight kegs or boxes or barrels or anything like that. There were a few pails and a couple of big tubs, And that was it. And so obviously figuring out how to get that out would have been a problem. But again, they can always go back later with the proper equipment, et cetera, et cetera. If it had been in a campaign, that's what they would have done. They would have gone back afterwards with a wagon full of empty barrels or whatever. But I didn't really get that far. We didn't really get that far into encumbrance, particularly back when we were essentially playtesting back in '74 and early '75. That hadn't come to the fore as a big consideration yet. Nowadays, how do I handle it? Well, nowadays I run adventures at conventions, and it really doesn't come into effect very often. And where it does, because Lord knows you can never predict what any given group of 6 to 9 players is likely to do. I can run an adventure I wrote 6 times, and it'll pan out differently 6 ways. When it happens, then okay, common sense must prevail. That enormous block of ice that has that enormous bejeweled something or other frozen in the middle. No, you don't have ice tongs. So we got to figure out some common sense. And so we, fantasy world or not, we still had to live with common sense, unless you had magic that would overcome that. Portable hole, flying carpet, these kind of things. Encumbrance just didn't get to be that big a deal. In a campaign, it's much easier to deal with and ignore if you choose. Again, you have to let common sense be your guide in this. Next topic. Multi-class players. I don't care for them as PCs, but on the other hand, in my group of 15 pre-gens that I have for each adventure that I run and allow the players to pick out of, I have a bunch of multi-classed or split class, whichever you want to call it. Specifically, I do not allow magic users to split class with anything that's going to let them use edged weapons. The exception to that would be if a magic user were to come into possession of a named sword, a sword with an ego, perhaps, or one of these very special swords that should be very rare in every campaign. I would probably allow that, simply because people at the table would argue that Gandalf had his special fancy sword. Okay, but for the most part, especially amongst the lower levels, when they're climbing up, I would not allow that. Magicians have such an enormous advantage once they get to 3rd or 4th level, 5th level, when they can start wielding some really heavy-duty spells that don't affect just one person, but a whole room full or whatever. They have enough advantages. And again, I do still share Gary's concern that magic users not take over a campaign, because when that happens, you no longer have a campaign. Now you're writing a novel about a bad guy. That's just kind of the way I look at it. Now in my pre-gens, I have a bunch of half-elves. We'll talk about that next, the half-breeds. But several of them I allow to mix and match, because after all, they're elves. So, and some people like playing elves and some people don't. All my pre-gens have backstories, and they're all very well equipped, given their levels and everything. But I do allow fighters to have to multi-class with, say, a thief In fact, I have several that are like that. Hobbits, if you want to play a hobbit, then they or a halfling, pardon me. Then I have a couple of those, and they have multi classes of being a thief or being a fighter, and I have no problem with that. Again, because I bow to Tolkien, and they're his little creatures had clever fingers, and they were etc. So I do a little, but if it were my campaign, I would strongly encourage a player not to try doing multi-class, not at least until they shouldn't even look at another class until they're at least, in old school terms, 6th level, 7th level. And then, because the way the rules are written, everything is half and half, so all your advancement slows to half. That's a heavy penalty to pay. And I don't player character, if the player wants to play a character that does that, I certainly am not going to say no, but I'm certainly going to make some recommendations as to what might be a good idea and what might not be a good idea. So I would discourage that. Now, to follow up on that with half-breeds. Half-breeds are really problematic to a lot of people, myself included. Gary and I, when this phenomenon started appearing, we were sitting around wondering just who thought this stuff up and how did half-breeds come around? How did they come to be? Nobody is going to willingly mate with an orc. At least, certainly not back in the fantasy milieu that we built back then and what was currently popular in literature. So Gary and I wondered, were they products of rape? That would certainly be a stigma that would stick to a player character, and I can't see it'd be a good one. Anything more than a half orc or a half goblin or a type of fae, and by fae, the elves and the pixies, whatever. Anything other than that, the origin story is not likely to be very pleasant. And really, what was it? All this half-orc stuff, they're min-maxing. When you get into these half human, half whatever, or half whatever and half whoever, whatever, however, it seems to me to be a form of min-maxing, and I don't like min-maxing in the extreme. I've never understood min-maxing. Where's the fun in building up, maxing out a character by pulling all these little questionable decisions and questionable claims together? Where is the fun in that? It's like cheating on your dice rolls. Who are you cheating? Yourself. Playing these amped up uber-de-duber characters, it's like taking a 15th level party of 5, a mixed party of 5, and going in and playing at a beginning level adventure module. Where's the fun in that? Yeah, you're going to wade through them like Godzilla knocking down power lines. But, where's the fun in that unless you're just into carnage and destruction? And there's board games for that. I just don't understand min-maxing. Now, I'm going to talk about one of my favorite people again, Jolly Blackburn. and he's nice at the dinner table. And to be honest, I don't know how much of what he writes in the game or what he writes in the strip is the same as if there are actual rules in the game. But those guys are some of the worst min-maxers ever, because they take handicaps to get more build points. And they take, silly stuff like stutters and limps, and they can build. I never really understood that. It's roll up a character's stats and populating, fleshing out yourself in your role play, and try those things. And hey, he has a knack for figuring out how to open doors. He's displayed that earlier, and as you do it more often, but you have an increasingly better chance of success. Doesn't mean you're necessarily going to become a thief, because to go down and become work as a first level thief, you might not be as skilled as you had been as the guy that had figured out doors before. So again, I don't understand the motivation. If that's the way you like to play, I'm not criticizing it. I'm simply saying I don't understand it exactly, and it's not the way I play or the way others have played with me and games I've played in. I think it's the struggle that's fun, not wading into a pack of puppies with fireballs. There's no fun there. So we'll go on to something else. Spell points. I've been told that there are game systems where spell points work. I think somebody once told me that they're a part of RuneQuest. We being TSR at the time that spell points came out as an alternative, because again, players were seeking ways to max out, in this case, the wizards, and assign them a certain number of points that they could then burn casting various spells that they knew. Well, we were against that, and I still am, for a number of reasons, and that is the primary basis of the magical system in D&D, particularly the original, was based on Jack Vance's Dying Earth. You could find these spells and memorize them and hold them in your brain until you used them, and then they were gone. In the Dying Earth, they didn't actually understand all the ins and outs of what they were doing, but they knew if they said these words and made these gestures and had these physical elements, that a given predictable result would happen. Don't like spell points, because I like the idea that a magic user has to commit to his spells, and he can't just rummage through a Rolodex of available offensive weapons. He has to pick and choose. Now, as a magic user goes on and advances in levels, he's going to pick up, I would logically assume, some scrolls, whether it's a one user or a multi-user or a learner, where by deciphering this scroll, you learn a new spell. We used to allow scrolls to go either way. You could read it in the midst of the battle, and it would work if you were able to read it, or you could take it home and study it and add it to your spell book. Spell points violated all those provisions. I still don't like the Rolodex idea of let me thumb through my spells. Now, if you've got a handful of rings and amulets, and all this stuff, that's the advantage. That's the compensation for not being able to pick anything you want, because If you have a ring of invisibility, you obviously don't need to cast invisibility on yourself. So that's maybe not a spell you're going to take with you that day. But if you know that you want the party to sneak through something, maybe you will take it and throw it on the party, but it's an optional type thing. Spell points refurbished automatically, like, you know, the water guy came and filled up your water cooler every night. That wasn't cool, in that if you went out with, you know, your 8 or 9 spells that you knew, and you only used 3 of them, well, you didn't need the entire night just to replace those 3. Not the way we played, not the way I played. I play now in conventions that the magic users, if they get 8 uninterrupted hours, they can replace their whole repertoire. If they're happy with the 5 they still have, and they only have 3 to replace, well, if the night isn't broken up badly, disturbed, and I always have my players, if they're camping overnight, select watches, and so I know if it happens in the middle of the night who's awake or who's supposed to be awake and who isn't. And so if the magic users, and usually the party sees the wisdom and, you know, don't wake the magic user, then if he's only got 3 to replenish, then as long as he gets 2 of the 4 night shifts, he's good. And I don't worry about it. I always assumed that, and we always played that, magic users carried a spell book with them. I don't want to hear about how big and cumbersome they are and how they got a big eyeball on the front and they're bound in brass and all that stuff. No, I was more in the paperback idea that a wizard going out to adventure was going to have maybe not his big fancy eye on the front bound in brass spell book, but he's going to have a copy of his spell book with him. Problem solved. That's the way we played. We didn't complicate it any further. Spell points complicate things. Now, there are systems that use them. Swell. We didn't. It's not the way we designed it. Again, we felt that it was important that a magic user who's a pretty potent dude, and as they get bigger, they're real potent, needed to be smart enough to have a good mix of spells available, given what they knew or didn't know about where they were going and what they were getting ready to do. So now I don't like spell points. I don't like spell points any more than I like skills and abilities. Again, we handled them differently. If you tried something and you were successful, then you were considered, maybe you got a knack for that. And if you tried something similar again and you were successful, well, you did have a knack for that. And so what we called, or what we recognize as a knack, apparently is now a skill or ability. Now, I know that I'm at odds with a lot of people that love skills and abilities. We didn't use them in the campaign. I didn't use them in my campaign a couple of years ago here locally. It's not part of OD&D, and therefore I don't use it. I know there are systems that set great store by this, and that's okay, but I think a lot of the fun is developing the character as the campaign goes on, discovering by trial and error what the character is able to do. And again, you find out who has a knack for this, or, you know, an eye for that, or somebody who's just got really mad persuasive skills that could, you know, talk an alligator down out of a tree. Those are knacks. I guess you could call it that, but I don't like seeing skills and abilities on a chart or a table. It makes it too cut and dried. I like the character development as the action goes on. I like the fact that the guy that we used to call Hobbit just got better and better at being a thief. Then the thief rules came out. All right, he was already good at doors and locks. Thief rules came out. He changed characters when we rebooted the campaign, and he was a natural for it. We had guys that were, the guy had stumbled onto a language, figured out a language once before. Well, maybe they had and again, they had to have a decent intelligence and a decent wisdom. Again, as we used those stats back then, they were much more amorphous and broad-reaching than they are now. But that's how we developed a character, through trial and error, through failure, through success. I think that's more fun than coming in with a character that you say, okay, and you rattle off your 6 strengths, and I've got barnyard negotiating skills. I've got putting out pyrotechnic skills, and plumbing skills, and animal husbandry, and animal fertility skills, and knowledge of fertility dances of primitive cultures, and the list goes on and on. If you are a really sneaky DM, you just never give them a situation where those skills would come in particularly handy and become a game breaker. Or you just ignore skills and abilities altogether, and you develop them by the player character as the play goes on. That's my idea of how I would deal with skills and abilities. The whole premise of starting as a first level a campaigner, player, adventurer, is that the general populace are all zeros. You're a 1. You're head and shoulders above the mob, because you are not content to live out your dreary life looking at the south end of a northbound ox pulling a plow, or sticking your arms under chickens and getting them covered with chicken poop, collecting eggs, or tanning hides, or whatever your options were. You sought adventure. You sought a way to advance yourself. Now, you may have started out with an old rusty Pugio and hit the road and found a couple other like-minded people and formed an agreement, a pact, a tauntaun, whatever you want to call it, and set out to adventure. So you're already extraordinary. So giving you options to do these skills and abilities the first time in my opinion, is not at all out of line with the way that character development ought to go. It ought to be free and easy, and part of the game flow, if you will. I got to put on my glasses to read this note. Sorry about that. Okay. We're going to retouch a topic that I hit on last week. Psionics. I wrote the Psionics. I admit it. I'm not ashamed of them. They could have been better. They could have been easier to understand. I know that now, and I have the skills to perhaps do that now. But the main thing is that they were really out of place in D&D. They were introduced to D&D because we had all these other monsters, most of which were introduced at the same time. who could eat your mind, and nobody had a defense against it, let alone an attack. Well, I think we should have just left the Mind Flayer and the Brain Devourer and had them just be really awful, hideous monsters that were easy to kill. Pardon me. Excuse me. I need to wet the throat. And we should have put Psionics into Gamma World. Gary Con 9. Gamma World would have been a perfect place for Psionics because everything's already mutated, changed around, and different. Perfect place for psionics. Mental mutations of all kinds. I think today, if you put the psionics, well, rewritten, to be honest, to be fair, cleaned up a little bit, they would go great in any dysfunctional, dystopian, post-apocalyptic world. Now, would they fit into every system? I can't say. I do think they would have made an interesting add-on to Gamma World. I don't know to what extent Jim Wampler has mental abilities in Mutant Crawl Classics, which is coming out very shortly. I don't recall when I read the original manuscript how heavily he delved into that. But that's really where Psionics should have gone. Psionics should have gone in something like that where everybody was screwed up. Psionics in D&D, if you somehow get that character who has those skills, and again, it was supposed to be, like a 1 in 1,000 possibility that you had those rare skills. Someone made a comment that in their campaign they had a thief that had psionic ability, and he ran the strongest guild in the city. Well, I don't have a problem if that thief that he referenced that has psionics is an NPC, because I'm all for giving the dungeon master all the edges that he can get, and having a very powerful NPC is a very powerful tool. It's a big club in the hand of the DM, a big club in the hand of the DM, and should be wielded with great circumspection. And again, if you get a person that's just got so much psionic ability, you're no longer running a campaign. Now you're getting ready to write a novel about this dude with these mind powers that enslaves the world and, whatever. And if that's your bag, slave the world, whatever, if you really do play like the Knights do and you want to take over the world, well, okay, there's a method to do it. But again, that doesn't fit in with my ethos of role-playing. Not at all. You're there to have fun. And if you're not having fun, you're doing the wrong thing. Speaking of which, in episodes to come, I intend to veer away from RPGs once in a while, because after all, at heart, I'm a minis player. I don't have any more minis to speak of other than my curio cabinet of my nicely painted ones, most of which are done by other people. I donated over 4,000 micro armored tanks to a museum out in California to build a huge diorama of one of George Patton's battles in Germany. And I don't have them anymore, but I love to play them. Board games are what got me into gaming. In the 6th grade, I played Avalon Hill's D-Day and played it heavily for a couple of years till he and I went to different middle schools. And that's really where my heart has always been with boards and minis. Boards first is what I first played. Minis came along later in college, actually. Last night, for the first time in a long time, since might be the first time since my cancer diagnosis and subsequent chemo and all that crap, I got some of my game group together last night, and we played Rails and Sails, the newest Ticket to Ride iteration. I highly recommend it. We played Tiny Epic Galaxies, and that's a great, fun, fast card game. And we played to warm up, as we used to do back in the 80s. We warmed up with a game of Naval War. Great night. I love doing that. As the DM, I have to work. I have to set up all the parameters. I have to think up the story. And I used to do that a lot. And I still do it for conventions, but I'm doing one-offs. I'm not doing campaigns anymore. So, yeah, I'm going to talk about boards once in a while. I'm going to talk about minis. And I'm going to talk about how the two come together. And next time, I think, as an example, I'll talk about the 4 games that I'm going to run at Gamehole Con in November in Madison, Wisconsin. I don't just run RPGs. I've got a racing simulation that I'm going to run. I've got a big naval battle that I'm going to run. And then I have a couple of very oddball RPGs that I'm going to run. And that's kind of the way my gaming goes nowadays. In fact, I actually do more boarding and minis playing than I do RPGing. And that's okay, because RPGing is hard work. Board games are fun. If you're the DM, RPGs are hard work. They can be fun, but there's a commitment to being the DM that uneducated players don't appreciate. People that have played for a while do appreciate the old adage that you can never cover all the possibilities of what a group might do. It's absolute gold. It's graven in stone. You cannot figure out what everybody might try to do and therefore cover it. So you just don't worry about it. You figure out a few and you rely on the DM. DMs have gotten lazy. And this is going to probably tick off a couple of people. But in my opinion, DMs have gotten lazy. They want everything handed to them in a nice little shrink wrap package and not have to think too hard. Not every DM, certainly. There are still many, many, many very good ones. But in preparing a package for sale, this is what you have to. You have to figure that nobody wants to do any conversions. Nobody really wants to think. Therefore, my conclusion is that they've gone lazy and soft. Now, a good case in point, and I'm not bitter about this, it's just a lesson I learned. A good case in point is when Eldritch Enterprises was putting out their adventures, we developed something we called Gamer Common. We had to think up new words that nobody else had used that meant basically the same things for the stats. And then we had to figure out a mathematical system that could be converted, like divide by 5, or something real deep like that. And yet, some people looked at it and go, oh, I got to think. I don't want this. And I don't think I'm being unfair, because I'll give you an example of lazy. there was a friendly local game store, since closed, at the height of their success, go figure. But anyway, right after Eldridge had printed their very first products for sale at a con, and we had some left over, I took them to the friendly local and said, hey, you can be the very first one in the whole state of Ohio to sell these on your shelves. And what are they? I told him. He looked through them. Oh, you got to convert them. Handed it back to me and said, no, thanks. I was dumbfounded. Plus, I was a little pissed off. I figured, hey, you didn't just brush me off like that, did you? And he did. But I came to find out that his was not an uncommon response. And to this day, I mean, we gave permission to several other companies to use Gamer Common because they saw the value in it. But I think a lot of them ran into the same problems. Too many people want everything laid out in advance, and they want their thinking done for them. And that's why you get 46-page adventures that could have been printed in 28. We don't leave enough blanks for the DMs to fill in to make it their own. Think on that a while. And on that note, well, before I go, what you want me to talk about, what you want answers to, what you want, put them in the comments. That's where I get all these topics. Put them in the comments. And if it's something, that I like or it's relevant or interesting or any number of reasons, I'll talk about it. I'll answer it, whatever. Half of this tonight came on questions out of comments. And that's fine. I'm used to that. Being one of the old farts that's been playing this since time immemorial, I'm used to that. That's fine. And that's kind of what I'm here to do. But I'm also going to talk about some of my favorite board games and some of my favorite minis games and some of the campaigns that I used to participate in, minis campaigns that I used to participate in the old-fashioned kind of gaming where it was almost like play by mail. You sent your moves. There was a moderator who decided who ran into who where and who conflicted where, and that set up a whole series of battles. Fight in the Skies as a board game was the same way. You were squad commanders. You were assigned portions of the front, and the moderator, who in this case was always Mike Carr, obviously the author of the game when we were at TSR, he determined that, okay, this was a possible conflict, this was a possible, and so then we would get together and we fly out these 3 or 4 scenarios that had come about as our campaigning. So campaigning isn't solely RPGing. In fact, long before RPGing, campaigns were alive and well in gaming. And on that note, I will say goodbye.